People knew that it wasn't just going to be pheromones. They knew that it was a mixture, and they knew that it was something that went through the EPA, and that it had to be something that was approved under an emergency declaration, and then at some of the meetings that they held in Santa Cruz in the city and county, they talked about the microcapsules, the encapsulation process, and that the chemicals were going to be inside of these little plastic balls, basically. So obviously, to create plastic or what is similar to plastic, they have to use other ingredients. So I was wondering what those were, especially because there's been a lot of recent health research showing that certain types of plastics are very dangerous for our health. And I was particularly concerned about my son, because he plays a lot outdoors, and we have an organic garden, and he digs in the dirt and he plays and rolls around in the grass, and I have a young toddler, a 3-year-old, and he was and I didn't want him to be rolling around or eating food from our garden that might be exposed. I mean, I have an organic garden on purpose. I don't want pesticides in the garden. And we're not obsessive about it. We eat out in restaurants, and I'm sure we, consume some pesticides, but we try to minimize it. And I make a choice about that, a conscious choice to protect the health of my son. I was wondering what the other ingredients were, and I wanted to know, what they were spraying, what was in it, and what the safety evidence was, and what the pheromones were. I found it was, a synthetic pheromone. I learned more about the process and what that involved, and what other ingredients, the delivery mechanism, and the microcapsules. And I was concerned about inhalation, and how the size of the particles, and about the other ingredients. And so what we were told in the meetings is that it's safe. And so I asked, when I called on the phone to the CDFA, and in the meetings, I asked what evidence is there for safety, and if they've evaluated it for safety, they need to have evidence. I'm a scientist, and so in my field, you don't say something is safe unless you have evidence for it. So I asked for the evidence, and no evidence is available. It's hearsay. It's just they say it's safe. That's meaningless to me. If I said that, I would be laughed out of my profession. I would lose my professional license, actually. I would not be allowed to do what I do, because I can't make conclusions that are false. I need to base on true evidence. And so I looked for evidence, and I found there's no reports on the safety. There's no evaluation of it. They said they had done it in New Zealand and Australia. So I actually searched websites and looked for information there. And what I found was that they had not sprayed it over human populations. They had sprayed it over agricultural areas, and that they didn't spray cities with people, and so there was no comparable. They didn't test it, and then I asked for more. I continued to probe different people, public officials and such, and to look for more information. I found no evidence of safety whatsoever. Then I found that they were comparing it to applications there, but the ingredients were different. It was a different concoction, and so you can't say that this chemical is safe because that one was, and they have 1 or 2 ingredients that are the same. And so then I started to really distrust the public officials, because they seemed to be lying. They were saying they had evidence of safety, but they weren't able to provide it. A simple question, no. They weren't able to come up with one scientifically reviewed, peer-reviewed report to say it's safe. And so they were basing their conclusions on lack of data, and so I couldn't trust what they were saying. So then I had to be really concerned, and as a mom, I had to take action to protect my son. If they weren't going to take action to protect my son, then I was. And in my field, whenever you do anything to people, you always do everything possible to look at alternatives first. And if there's any risk of safety, you do testing on the least sensitive people. You wouldn't ever spray over babies and pregnant women and children and elderly. And I have elder parents in town who could be affected too, and I was very concerned about them as well. And so I decided to try to do something to help whatever I could to protect. So I came to meetings, and I tried to ask questions and ask them to please research this and do the scientific evaluations first, to look at alternatives first. I asked them to answer questions that were never answered. They said they couldn't answer those questions. And so I felt pretty helpless. And so I decided, I mean, there wasn't much I can do. All I could do is try to leave town while they're spraying, while it's in the air. And then later we found out that their design is for it to stay in there long term, so that's not that effective. And then I decided, well, I can at least cover the garden. My son, it's really his garden. It's his, you know, I can cover the vegetable garden. I can cover his sandbox, and I can cover the areas where he digs the most and where he spends time in physical contact with the earth and the ground the most. And at least I can do that, and then roll up tarps, and then next time they spray, put them out, and then roll them up. And so that's what I had planned to do. It was clear to me that there was a lot of unanswered questions. I mean, it wasn't clear to me that the pesticide they would be spraying would be dangerous, but it was clear to me that there was no evidence for safety, as they said there was. And so I did not want to expose my son to something that had no evidence for safety. And so my plan was to cover up our vegetable garden and his sandbox, and to cover up the parts of the yard that he normally plays in, makes physical contact with, and digs in. And my plan was also to leave town and be away from the area for a night or two when they were spraying and it was in the air. You know, I've learned since then that probably isn't that going to be that helpful, but at that time, that's what I thought. And then I thought, well, then I can prevent him from having lots of contact. He'll have contact at the parks and at other areas a lot, but I can at least reduce the amount of exposure. So that was my plan, to put out the tarps and to lay them out and roll them up, and then when they sprayed again, to roll them out, and just to do that each time. Okay, so what I did is I took clear plastic to put over the garden so that the plants would get sun. And so I had some wooden posts, just stakes that I put in the corners of the garden, and I suspended some clear plastic over the stakes so that they were over all of the plants, and then drained down. And then I had a plastic going up and over the next garden bed. And then I had a thicker plastic that I used, or a tarp, plasticized tarp that I used and laid out to cover all of these digging areas where my son digs in the garden and over the grass where he plays. And so they were overlapping. All of them were overlapping into each other. And then over, I had the clear plastic over the sandbox, and actually since then we've filled the sandbox with more sand, but it was pretty deep at that time. There was just a little bit of sand because we had a small sandbox that we had emptied into here, and we hadn't filled it up yet, so it was quite deep, but it was covering this whole thing. So and then when I came back after the rain had happened, this was just caved in, and there was a huge deep puddle. It was as deep as this is, all the way in the center. And then there were certain areas where it gets lower, where there were deep puddles, and all of the rain that had come down. I had the sheets stapled with the staple gun to the fences, and so it was kind of angled, and so all the rain had collected into these big pools on top of the plastic tarps, and that's what I was rolling up and trying to put into a trash, putting the end in a trash bag and then rolling it into the trash bag when I had those reactions. That's what happened. I had planned to leave town But then my grandmother died. And so we were having to fly out of town to go be with family, and so it turned out that the night that they actually sprayed, we had to be in town because I had to pack and our things to leave town to be at the memorial for my grandmother, and we had to leave. We had tickets at a nearby airport, and so I couldn't go away to be with friends and family further north. I had to be closer to here, and so we found out they were going to actually spray that night, and so I put out the tarps, and by that time I had found I was used to doing it, and it wasn't that big of a deal, and so I decided to just cover my whole yard, which seemed a little crazy. I knew that my husband thought I was a bit crazy, and it did seem crazy. I covered my whole yard with plastic, but it was not a big deal to roll out the tarps, so I figured I'd buy a couple more big tarps and just cover the whole thing, and then I wouldn't worry about my son as much. And so I laid them all out, and it finished just a few minutes before the plane started, and then we just stayed inside, and I packed to go to the memorial, and then we had to leave. The planes kept me up all night. They were flying and screaming overhead, and I was needing my sleep because I had to be flying with a young child to go to my grandmother's memorial, and I had been trying to plan and be prepared to speak and all of that, but I couldn't sleep. I wasn't allowed to sleep because the planes were screaming very loud right overhead, and then we had to leave at 6 in the morning, when I imagine there was still quite a bit out in the air because they stopped around 2, I think, in our area. They flew from about 8:30 or 8:15 till 2 a.m. continuously. And for most of those hours, it sounded like they were directly over our house, going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth over our house. I don't imagine that they were exactly over our house. I'm sure they were going, a few feet in each direction, but and sound travels. But it sounded for much of that time, many of those hours, like they were directly over our house, and it was extremely loud. I mean, you know what a plane sounds like, and they were flying at 500 feet supposedly, and it was loud. The house was shaking, the windows were rattling, the house was it was loud. It was impossible to sleep, and so I know from my background in studying, things like mental health effects and psychosis and stuff. You keep people up for days at a time, and they did this the night afterwards too. We were gone on a plane, but we, some people were up for 2 nights, and if they're doing that every 30 days or every 90 days, they're going to lose money. People being able to function in school and at work, and they're going to have car accidents. I mean, many of the people I talked to said that it was impossible to sleep because it wasn't a couple hours. It was from 8:30 until about 2:30 in the morning, continuously, very loud, unbelievably loud. And so we left, and my son started coughing that night, and I didn't know if he was getting sick or if it was related to the spray. I wasn't sure. He's in preschool. He's a toddler. I figured he was probably getting sick, but I wasn't sure. And then we left for a few days. We were out of town, and when we came back, we arrived home, and I hadn't obviously had any time to roll up the tarps, and I learned that there had been a huge downpour of rain, one of the biggest rains of the year, the next day after the spraying, or maybe it was 2 days after the spraying. We were gone for 3 days, so sometime within the next 48 hours there was a huge amount of rain, and which I was surprised because they had said they would not fly the planes during the rain, if there was going to be a rain, because it would wash a lot away, and because we're just a few blocks from the Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary, and so all the water that goes into our gutters goes directly to the ocean, and I knew they had promised the Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary they weren't going to contaminate the ocean, so I was really surprised that the timing worked out that way, and I hadn't been paying attention to the weather with my grandmother's death and everything. I not clued into what was going on with weather predictions. So I don't know how much of a surprise that was, but usually they're pretty good about predicting that kind of a storm. So we came back, and the tarps were covered in water. I mean, it was deep. The one in the sandbox had caved in completely, and it was because it had come in from angles and pooled up. It was literally like a foot deep of rainwater in the sandbox. And then we have a very large sandbox because it was a vegetable bed that we converted. And then all of the tarps had rainwater, and all of the dipped areas were big pools. So I had a huge mess to deal with, and I didn't know what to do, and I was just, sad about my grandmother, and I had to get ready to clean that up. And so I didn't let my son in the backyard for many days. And then for a couple days while that was there, and then finally I came home. I had to take time off of work, put him in school, and came home and tried to clean up. And so I decided, that I should wear my rain boots so I don't ruin my shoes, and I wore gloves in case I was touching anything that was of concern. And I wore an N95 mask, but I wasn't really that concerned about myself. I just didn't want to pour it all into the whole yard and the vegetable garden and the sandbox, because I just made this effort to try to protect it. So I felt like I didn't know what to do. And so my solution was, luckily there were big tarps, I'd just roll them up and put the end into a trash bag, and I would just roll it up and have the water kind of channel into the trash bag, and I'd just throw it away, which seemed like a lot of plastic to throw away, and I couldn't use it again as I had planned. But that seemed to me to be the only solution, other than just dumping it all over my yard. So I hadn't really thought that I would have any health concerns about it, and I started doing it, and my eyes started burning, and then they started burning more and more, and it was hurting really badly, and my eyes were tearing and burnt. I've never experienced anything like that. It was just, like tearing, like when you cut onions or something, but this real intense burning. And I didn't know what to do, because if I left it, then my son would go play in those puddles, and so I had to finish. So I tried to work as fast as I could and get as much done as I could, and I got about half the yard cleared, and then my eyes were watering so bad and burning so bad that I couldn't see anymore. And so I just stopped and tore off my clothes and went into the shower and had to just rinse my eyes continuously, and it lasted a few hours, and then it was better, and then the burning went away. And so after that happened, then I still had the rest of the yard to clean up, and I didn't know what to do, and I was worried about that happening again to my eyes, and I wasn't sure if there was any reason to be concerned long term, or if it was just an immediate reaction. So I called my doctor, and my doctor was out, and so I talked to the doctor on call, and they said that they needed to report it to the county, and they thought that I was calling to tell them to report it, but I was just calling for the health thing. And they said they didn't know about the safety, the health effects, and that I should call the county health department. So I called the county health department, and the main department didn't know, and they said to call the environmental health department. And then I called the environmental health department, and I spoke with the man in charge there, and he said, he was a very nice man, he was very concerned about me, but he didn't know what to tell me. He had no advice. He said that it was clear that I was very sensitive to these chemicals, and that, he said that there's a certain number of people, a certain percentage of people that are very sensitive to the chemicals, I don't have chemical sensitivities. I've never had sensitivity to chemicals before like that. But he said that I must be particularly sensitive to the chemicals. So he said, don't clean it, you can't do that again. And I said, well, I can't, what am I going to do? Have my son play in the petals? He said to let them evaporate, but it had already been a week at this point since the rain, and they hadn't evaporated. They were very deep. And so I could let them evaporate if I didn't have my son play in my yard for a month or two, but they weren't evaporating rapidly. So I said, I could ask my husband to do it, and he asked about my husband's health, and my husband has asthma. And so he said, don't let your husband do it. He was very clear, you can't let somebody with asthma do it. So he knew that somebody with respiratory issues would be more sensitive to the spraying, to the spray that the rainwater mixed with. And so I couldn't have my husband do it. And so I figured, okay, I have to do it. He said, ask somebody else, ask a friend to do it. And ethically, how could I ask somebody else to go get poison? I mean, I obviously had a serious reaction, and I could not ask a friend to go have that reaction for me. I just could never do that to somebody else. Or ask somebody else to do that for me. So, and my parents in town are elderly. There's no way I could ask them. So I just figured that I would go and get goggles. So I got a special mask. I got like a chemical. It was for people who work with chemicals. I get special chemical safety mask for splashing and for protection. So I got that, and I figured that would be okay. So then 2 days later, so this was now a week after the spraying. It had been 7 days since the spraying happened. I undertook cleaning it up again, and immediately after I started doing that, my eyes started burning immediately, and I was really worried that I wouldn't be able to finish. But luckily, it got to a serious pain point and watering, so it was interfering with my ability to see. But it never got to as bad as it was, probably because I had those special goggles on. But pretty quickly, I started having breathing difficulties when I was breathing, and so I was having trouble inhaling. It was like I was sick or something, like I was having trouble inhaling. And so but I just did it the best I could, and so I cleaned it up and rolled them up and put them in the hefty bags, and worked as fast as I could. And my lungs, I started having more and more breathing trouble, and I started to think, what is in this stuff? This is not what they told us. This is not, I'm having breathing problems and eye problems, and this water, I know, just went into the ocean. And these children are playing in puddles. My son loves to play in puddles and splash in them and get completely wet. What if he was playing in these puddles? I know there's other kids playing in these puddles. And so I have mason jars, and I just poured some in there to figure, well, maybe we can find out what's in this stuff, since the government will tell us what's in it. And so I did that. I did dip it into the puddles and fill up some jars, and then just cleaned the rest up. And after I stopped, my lungs continued to hurt, and it got worse and worse and worse and worse for hours into that evening, into late that night, and then it continued for 6 days. That every breath I took, and I'm not exaggerating, every single breath that I took, when I inhaled, in the deep part of the inhalation, there was a sharp pain. It wasn't like congestion. It was kind of a little bit difficulty breathing, like you have, like if you have a pneumonia or bronchitis, but it didn't have that congestion, and the pain was very sharp. I've had serious bronchitis and kind of borderline pneumonia before, and I've had different kinds of coughs and things where you have that pain, and that's kind of like a dull kind of a pain, but it's kind of dull, and this was like a sharp pain, and it was every breath, day and night, all day long, for 6 days. And so this was in early November, And I was really scared. I didn't know if this would cause long-term damage or short-term damage. So I called that night, as it was getting worse and worse. I called the doctor on call, again, a different doctor on call, and said, what should I do? Should I use an inhaler? Will that make it worse or better? Or should I, what can I do? And the doctor said, this was a different doctor, and he said he had no concern about health problems. He had, they'd been told it was safe, and that he didn't think that an inhaler would make it worse, but that, so I could use that to help me breathe a little bit. And so I had an inhaler from when I had bronchitis the year before, and I had gotten sick with a flu, and so I had an inhaler, and I used that, and it didn't really help a lot. It was different. It was a different kind of thing, and so anyway, so it really interfered, because I had trouble doing anything, because I was just, it was amazing to have that kind of sharp pain in my lungs. It was kind of like, getting poked by something, or it was very odd, and not like when you're sick. And then 6 days later, I remember this vividly, because I was just, I was with my family. We were taking a trip, leaving for Thanksgiving to go visit family down south, and we were driving, and I remember just suddenly turning to my husband and saying, not every breath hurts anymore. It's just like every third breath. And I was just like, oh, thank goodness, because I didn't know how long it was going to last. And so then it became every third breath, and then like the next day it was every second breath, and then it slowly dissipated, and it, within a few days it stopped being every breath at all. And I think for maybe about 2 months after that, I had the tiniest pain in my lung. It wasn't that sharp pain, and it wasn't with every breath, but it was a pain that I had in one of the lungs, in one part of one of the lungs, that continued for about 2 months, and I still don't know if there's any kind of long-term sensitivity or damage or not. But I did notice that when I got sick a couple weeks ago, we all had that flu and fever that was going around. That part of my lung did hurt again when I was coughing, and so I imagine, I don't know if it's still healing or if it's a permanent thing that I have, but I did notice that was in that same spot, and it was not the same feeling as a normal kind of cough pain that you have. So that's what happened. And my son, like I said, that night that they did the spraying, when we were in town, he started coughing, and then we left town, and then we came back, and he had a low level cough and kind of increased, and then he had a cough for 6 weeks, and he had to start taking steroid inhalers for that cough, and the doctor thought that it was just a flu, because it was winter time, and she thought he had just gotten an illness, and he had something, but he's had coughs before when he gets the flu, or when he gets a cold even, and he has a bunch of sinus congestion, he'll get a cough. But he hadn't been sick, he was totally healthy, and he suddenly started with a cough that night. So it was really odd, and so he wasn't sick, and he suddenly started with a cough. You don't have a cough for no reason, usually it's to get something up. And so and it continued for 6 weeks. And then we stopped it, and then his cough went away, and then we stopped the medicine, and then he got sick after that, and he didn't have a cough. And so his doctor said that we should probably start him on the steroid inhaler a week before any future spraying, and we have to use it twice a day. And steroids, they're fairly safe, but with a young child who's growing, it's not something you want to do. And then they announced, the CDFA announced that they're going to be spraying every 30 days or every 30 to 90 days, and that they're planning to make it in a way that it will be in the air for that whole period that it will stay airborne, and they're going to do it about 9 months a year. So basically what the conclusion is that I have to put my son on steroid inhalers twice a day for 9 months a year, to keep him from having a cough that keeps him up at night and interferes with his sitting still and learning, because of the spray. It sounds like that's going to be the case, and so I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know, if I'm going to, I don't know what to do. I mean, I'm not sure what to do about that, because how the government could spray us with something to say protect profits, when a young child has to take medication daily to not react. It's horrible.
And you, for your sake, I mean, I can't believe that you're...
Sorry.
Oh.
When I think about my son, it's hard to think of. I just don't know what to do. And if we can't leave for 9 months, and if we move, then he's away from his grandparents. So I've lived in this community for 25 years, and so I don't know what to do about that. Excuse me, just a second. I don't know what's going to happen with me. I don't know if I'll have a reaction again or not. That was a very unusual circumstance that I was directly interacting with the rainwater. And, what the environmental health department said is there's going to be a certain percentage of people who are sensitive, and so some people will be fine and other people won't. And I'm not a chemically sensitive person, so if that happened to me, it's got to happen to other people. And I don't know. I don't know if I'll be more sensitive now, or if it'll be the same, or if I won't. And I don't know whether to then protect my yard again for my son, or to let him be exposed more, or I don't know, hire people to expose. I don't ethically feel comfortable with that, so I don't know what to do. I haven't figured that out yet. I just hope that they don't spray again. I guess trying to make a choice is frustration for fear. I guess fear for my child. Really, it's like, what does it do to him to expose him to a chemical in the environment, and then also a medication to combat his reaction to that chemical, to keep him to be able to breathe okay and not be coughing constantly? Or, do I uproot him and move him away from his friends and community and grandparents and family? I don't know what to do. I'm in a bind, and there's no solution other than don't spray people. Don't spray people to protect 1 to 2% of profits, or whatever they said it was. It's not the approach that you should take. And other governments have recognized that. Europe has banned all spraying, all aerial spraying, and it's, you don't do this to people. You don't do this to humans. It's not a choice that I think is, I can't, it's not a choice that should ever be made. And so all I can do is take action politically and try and fight it, and ask questions, and encourage science to be done accurately, and make people aware. And then I have to make some really hard choices about my family, and I'm not sure what to do about it. And I feel an obligation to protect others so that they don't have to go through what we went through. And I also worry about that rainwater and what's going to happen. I mean, the birds and the raccoons here and squirrels and it's going directly into the ocean, and it's going to be more and more and more and more, so the concentrations are going to be getting more intense. And so I don't know what we're doing to our environment. The material safety data sheets do definitely indicate that there can be burning in the eyes and some reaction in the eyes. They also indicate that there can be respiratory symptoms. Several of the ingredients are of concern. The government report that came out acknowledged that almost all of the symptoms that people are reporting are symptoms that are caused by these chemicals, and then they went and said that they don't think that the concentrations were enough. However, they told us in the meetings, and they have in answering questions, they did not collect data to show what the concentrations were in all of the areas. All they did was put out cards and count the number of particles in each area, but they didn't measure the chemicals. They didn't measure the outcome. I had those mason jars. I called the Department of Pesticide Regulation. I called the Environmental Health Department in the county. I called the city. I called the CDFA. I called local chemistry labs. I called the people who do water testing of rainwater, and I was told that no one does that testing. They can't do it, and that I'd have to spend thousands of dollars to hire a chemist to develop things to do the testing. And the only person in the government that I talked to who said that they were willing to do it would be if there were animals that had been hurt by the water that I had, and not because I was human. There was a department that dealt with animal reactions, and so they would do it if it was an animal reaction that I could show, but not a human reaction. And so the concentrations, they don't have any evidence of the concentrations, and yet they're saying that they weren't strong enough to cause the effects. But if they were, that these would be the effects: the respiratory symptoms, the burning in the eyes. And I think my case was rare in that, some people just kind of, were doing stuff and they kind of had reactions, and some were immediate, but some were later on. But mine was pretty clear. Those tarps went down within 20 minutes of when the spraying started, and then the rainwater happened and they were puddles. They're not contaminated. They're in my backyard. They're not near a road. They're not near anywhere that they could have other contamination. And immediately upon touching them, within minutes, I had the breathing thing and the burning. So, it's one person's report, but it's clear that there was an immediate direct reaction to that. It wasn't something else. I wasn't sick. It wasn't something that developed over time. But yes, the MSDS sheets show that. We don't have MSDS sheets on all of the ingredients because some of them are new things that they've created to make this chemical. And so we don't have MSDS sheets on all of the ingredients. And they haven't done safety testing on all of the ingredients in combination. And they're developing a new one now that they tell us they don't know what it is yet. They're making a new one. So they say that they're going to evaluate it for how well it works to stay in the air for 30 to 90 days. But clearly they haven't developed it yet. They said they're going to make a decision this month, sometime in April. And so they're planning to start spraying us in June, and that really doesn't allow any time for human safety studies. So to me, their plan is not to worry about safety, because otherwise they would plan to spray later, and they would allow a period of time between the choice of the chemical and the spraying so that they could test for safety. But they're not allowing a time period for testing for safety. So it looks like they don't have intentions to change their plan depending upon what human safety reactions there are. The other thing that for me is shocking and extremely upsetting, which is that the government is undertaking this plan because of projections of possible damage. And when you have direct human impacts and no impact of the moth, there's no damage. The moth has done no damage so far. We know they keep saying that they keep using, I think, March 2007, because that's when the California state recognized that the moth was here. But it was the year before when the Berkeley scientist found it in 2006. And so we know that it's been here for a couple years.
And they keep saying that if we don't do it soon, there's going to be this horrible damage, and there's been none still. And so you don't take risks with children. You don't take risks with physically ill people. I can just imagine all the people who have respiratory illnesses, and we know millions of people with asthma and other kinds of respiratory problems. You don't take risks with people because the possibility exists that there might be damage at some time in the future, and it will be a small percentage of profit. You don't do that. I can't imagine anybody making that decision. I'm shocked that they are. This is not a democratic process. It's we live in a democracy, but it doesn't apply in all situations. When you have appointed officials who are not elected into office, who are making decisions that impact people's health, you don't have a democratic process. And when there's no way to have a voice in what they're doing, and when they select the committees and the people on those committees who are making those decisions and evaluating their decisions and to see if they're okay or not for the public, then you don't have a democratic process. So while we do have a democratic government that functions in general as a democracy, we have areas of our lives that are controlled outside of that democratic process, and this is one of them, and I don't think it should be. I don't think that the public should be making the scientific conclusions. I don't think that that's the case, because you need people who are scientifically trained. However, you do need to have people responsible who are elected into office, and you need to have a voice for the public that is heard by all. You need to have a voice in the process from the public, in addition to scientific voice. Right now, scientists don't have a voice either. People who are trained scientists don't have a voice in that democratic process, because they have to be selected by the appointed officials, not the elected officials, to be on certain kinds of panels to review. And so that's why some scientists are going on their own to do studies and to publish reports and be interviewed by people like you, to try and get their word out and their expertise out so it can be taken advantage of. And we have wonderful experts in these areas. And I'm not an expert in entomology and toxicology. I've talked to some of them, and they have serious concerns and echo my concerns. And so when I'm concerned, and how I go to scientists, I go to people who know more than I do to find answers, and I look for studies, that no studies exist, and the experts are saying there's reason for concern. And I wish my government would hear that. Governor Schwarzenegger could stop this, and he chooses not to. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's because of the contributions to his campaign. I don't know if he is not informed enough. I don't know if he's not concerned about the citizens of this area of the state. I don't know what it is, but he has the power, and he is an elected official. He has the power to change this, and he's done nothing. And I wrote to him, and I've called his office, and I got a response that was a canned response, like one of the ones from the CDFA. He clearly isn't engaging in thinking about this, because he didn't respond. His response was not one that was different than the CDFA. It was, this is what they're doing. And so I wish that he would get involved. I think that he's somebody who has some concerns about the environment and about health, clearly, and I don't know why he is not viewing the health and the concerns of millions of people, including elected legislators now, who have gotten involved more recently. He's not hearing them, and he's not doing anything about it, and he's not taking a stand on it. And I think, in the long run, his reputation is going to be, his historical reputation will be greatly influenced by what is happening to us now. One of my concerns is that there's been a real focus on the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and they're the ones who came up with this approach to needing to eradicate the moth and use these kinds of the aerial spraying and that approach. But really, they're under huge pressure from the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, And the USDA is saying that if the CDFA doesn't do something, then they will. Now, I don't know if their preferred approach is the aerial spraying or not, because that came from the CDFA. But now the 2008 plan, everything they're doing this year is a joint effort between the USDA and the CDFA. And the USDA has said that they'll take over if the CDFA doesn't do what they're doing. So in my view, really it's the United States government through the USDA that has the power now. Governor Schwarzenegger can make a decision to stop this now, but the USDA will take over. And so the federal legislators who have oversight over the USDA really should be getting involved, and I do not know why they're not. And it's the U.S. government who is funding everything. In part, some people who have been involved have talked about why this is being done, and one motivation is because the state gets a lot of money. They get a lot of money for doing this, and all of that money is coming from the United States government, and they're the ones who are paying for the pesticides. They're the ones who are paying for they're the ones, the Department of Homeland Security paid for the public relations campaign that then got exposed and got canceled because to try and convince us that it's safe. So it's at the federal level that the funding is coming through, and it's at the federal level that the true decisions and power has been taking place. It seems to me that it would be a simple matter of evaluating the scientific data that shows that it's not really an actionable pest. It's like, it is a pest that you take action on, but it's not one of the ones that you take your most serious actions on, and that you treat it like the other leaf rollers in its family. The moth has a family of lots of other leaf rollers, and they all do the same thing. They nibble on the leaves and they cause some damage, but this moth hasn't done any damage yet in California. We think it probably will, and it probably will do a little bit of damage, just like the others do, and we control it the same way, and that we do trade negotiation to as other countries have done. And many countries they're not concerned about the moth. Europe hasn't put a quarantine on us. They're not concerned about it. They haven't put a quarantine on the United Kingdom. They have the moth. They're not concerned about it there. So it's just a matter of updating our information, reclassifying the moth based upon the new information, and renegotiating trade agreements to be equivalent with those of other countries, and all of this goes away. I mean, it does have economic impact. It's not so what, but you can renegotiate trade deals. They're not set in stone. You can reclassify a moth based upon modern information. They haven't done that yet, and they could.